Good morning on this beautiful Monday morning. And again, we talk about intraday movement and we see it each and every day. Well, Friday is an absolutely perfect example of what we've been talking about. When people say, well, the markets have done this, and I brought it up last week. Well, we finished up 60 points. But what happened between all of that? Well, you can look at Friday and say the same thing. We started off the day on Friday down 150 points. You look at the pre-market, things don't look so good. You get into the market, they start to improve. They start to improve throughout the trading session. Before you know it, we close on the Dow up 225 points, a pretty significant turn when you go to that minus 150 and all of a sudden you're running up 2.25. How about the NASDAQ? Same type of story. Kind of flashes back and forth, green and red early on, not really showing you a whole lot. Before we know it, the index itself is up 172 points. Now, let's also remember, that's 172 off of a much different base in terms of the absolute numbers of where the NASDAQ is and where we are looking at the Dow. Obviously, does change that as well as far as percentages. A monster move from the NASDAQ. What was really propelling that move to the upside for the NASDAQ? Certainly technology. Technology was extremely strong. Biotech up about 3%, so that's certainly contributing in a big way. And oh, by the way, you take a look over at the chips, you look at the SMH up, that as well. So the combination of all of that definitely fueling a really nice move that we had on Friday, and a nice way to close out the week because we actually had some decent pressure, and we all know we had volatility. What kind of volatility and how long would it last? We got up over 20. Seemed like it was up there for a little while. Well, it was up there for maybe a little less than 38, 40 hours, something like that. But actually, we were down on Friday, down about 14% on the volatility index, finished out the week at about an 18.5. Now, let's not forget, we were up near 24. We were up near 25. We had some nice moves holding above that 20 level. Didn't last very long. And all of a sudden, we immediately see volatility coming out in an extreme rate. So if you look at this past week, early in the week, you were starting off and we were talking about those teens. We had that spike into the 20s, and then here we finished back into the teens. So something of a pretty dramatic move for volatility as well. So how big was the volume? Well, I'm glad you asked. The volumes in the option world continue to be absolutely extraordinary. 42.3 million contracts trading on Friday. So another very active day. Part of what was shifting things around a little bit, crude oil. It's been under pressure. We've been talking about it. It hit up over that 77 level, been going down ever since. Actually, on Friday, we got into the 62s for the crude price of crude. So certainly some heavy pressure there. We'll get into a little bit more on that in just a second. But you look at the 10-year too. The 10-year's been kind of frozen. We had that rally back up. We got up near this 1.3 area, and also we've been kind of floating around 1.25, 126, 127, somewhere in that sort of a range. But it's definitely been a very, very tight range for the 10-year. Now, a couple names that were definitely moving that really stood out for me on Friday. Microsoft absolutely stood out. New highs, got up over 304. Then you look over at NVDA, and that was a stock that was up about 5%, a really nice move to the upside. Penn Gaming was up about 4%. Target, yes, Target. Everybody was screaming and yelling and wondering what's going on with Target. Target with a nice rebound, bounced back about 3% off of some of that sell-off that it had. Very similar if you go back in time. Look at that March quarter, you'll see sort of a similar path where numbers were unbelievable. People felt like, well, at least back then they were saying peak earnings. Stock got sold off, got bought right back up almost immediately after that. Sort of seeing a similar sort of a game sort of playing out in that same sort of a way. GM had some news late. We'll get into that in just a second. But we also had Cisco up and over 58. So that's another one of those names. Old school tech. We've been talking about how oftentimes we go back to some of the old tech. I mentioned Microsoft. Now I mentioned Cisco. Gives you a little idea. Old tech, definitely with a leadership role. Today, what are we looking at? Well, markets look pretty interesting. They start off strong this time and continue to get a little bit stronger. Dow was up about 150, 170 points in the pre. We're up 125, 140 or 225, 240 points after I last looked. So another nice move as well for the Dow. NASDAQ, same sort of a thing. Started off reasonably strong, up about 50 points, 45 points to pre-market. Started to run triple digits, a nice move to the upside. So we've been seeing this sort of play out, and it's been very, very interesting. The VIX 18, starts to drop a little bit, gets into the 17s. Here we are now holding somewhere in the 17s. The 10 years just kind of holding. You've got gold and silver that continue to play out as well. And I'll tell you what, you look at crude. Now that stands out today as much as anything, with crude up about 4%. That's an interesting move to the upside, recapturing 65 and actually getting over the price of 65. So leadership today, we got tech, we got semiconductors, we've got energy, which is explosive move up over 3%. So that's a really nice move today as well. Financials making a nice move up over more than 1%. So what are some of the names that are really starting to move because of that? Well, Chevron, a big name, certainly moving with oil, but it's those beta names that are absolutely rocketing to the upside. Names like Oxy and Devon and Diamondback and Valero, those kind of names really making a nice move to the upside. I mentioned the semiconductors. How about NVIDIA? Again, Xilinx. You look at Maxim, Intel with a nice move as well. And going back to GM for just a moment, when we look at GM and what's been happening with that stock, obviously there was a lot of news after the after hours on Friday, moving the stock, pushing it to the downside. And now we've got this move. It's down about 2%, not as awful a move as maybe many expected. And then you look over at Boeing with a nice move to the upside. So, you've got the yin and yang going here within this. Now I got two unusuals, and I got to let you know I'm going to be doing the halftime report today. We got big old Frank Holland leading the charge today for us. Scott's, I believe, on maybe a vacation or something. We got big old Frank coming in. Should be a lot of fun. We'll get some different unusual then. But let me hit on this. NVIDIA. Stock trading about 214. We had a buyer of 16,000. Yeah, 16,000 of the August 27th expiring. That's Friday. The 215 calls. Those are about 2.25 up to about $5 for those calls. That stood out. That's a very large trade with a very, very short time frame. Another one, large trade, short time frame. It's a smaller than the 16,000, but Mara. Now, Marathon Digital is another one of these crypto miners. They've been talking about it all day on financial channels and so forth. I tell you what, this Mara is an interesting one. Stock was trading just above 38. They're buying this week's expiring August 27th, the 38 calls, buying here. About 2,500 of those, $1.25 up to about $2. So with Bitcoin on this monstrous move up over 50,000, that's really something to keep an eye on. And we've been talking about how Bitcoin has been moving on its own to the upside as we've seen some of the pressure early in the week, last week, and that volatility. Bitcoin's been making this move to the upside. Very, very strong move. Folks, have a great day of trading. I look forward to seeing you at noon today.